We the jack shit sippers. We sippin' jack shit sippers. We sippin' jack shit sippers. Alan hit me on my phone, he said I need a hit quick.
Welcome in, week 2, boys. Let's get it. All right, before we move on to week 2, let's look at week 1, a little review. Last week, your last place commish, that's right, last place again. I predicted that last year's Sacco, Cameron, would beat last year's champ, TJ. The prediction mostly predicated on Cameron's quarterbacks. I thought they'd have pretty good weeks. Well, your commish is 1-0, so celebrate that, but it did not go as planned. Trevor Lawrence and Travis Hunter combined for a disappointing 23 points against arguably the league's worst defense in Carolina. Travis Etienne got it done, but they did not look great in the passing game, so hopefully the Jags, hometown Jags, can get that figured out. The rest of Cameron's team did show up, but they didn't blow up. He scored a solid 136 points. TJ definitely had a shot in this one. Lamar did the best he could, just picking up where he left off last year, scored TJ 35 points. But he was sunk by his rookie Cam Ward. Cam did not get it done. He had a whopping 3.5 points. So a win's a win for your commish. I will take it. I am 1-0, so undefeated. We are going to move into week 2. All right. It's always tough, trying to figure out what game I'm going to pick. So I always try to pick the games that are closest predicted, just so I'm not picking, a landslide victory. And this week, our closest predicted game is this year's Sacco Paul versus our local rain predictor, Big Thunder. Now, we all know last year I was 0-3 picking against Thunder. I only picked wrong 4 games all year. 3 of them were Thunder's games. So hopefully I can turn that around and it's not a forever thing. Otherwise, you might get a damn you, Simma, again. All right, so let's get into the game, a little tail of the tape. Thunder's 1-0. He's predicted to score 158 points this week. Sacco Paul beat me last week. He had a very good game. His team name is Jamarvelous. Thunder, obviously, big bounce test. The AI predicts Paul at 156. So they're within 2 points of each other, according to AI. Both 1-0. All right, let's move on. Quarterbacks, try to do a group, position group by position group. Thunder brings Jordan Love and Father Time Joe Flacco to the party. 41, I believe. The over-under in the Green Bay game is 48.5, giving Pack about 28 points implied. So I always like the quarterback at home in a high-scoring game. I imagine that Love has a good week. He doesn't run much, so some variance there, but he should get a couple touchdowns this week, so I will take him to have a pretty solid game. And then for Joe Flacco, he gets Baltimore. I don't really care much about the analysis when it comes to Flacco. The guy's flinging it 50 times a game. I don't care who he's playing or what the score should be. He's just putting it up enough. You can kind of chalk him in for 250 yards and probably 2 touchdowns every week. The question becomes, does this guy throw a pick 6? How many interceptions does he throw? I don't know. I absolutely can see a pick 6 happening, but I can't predict that. So I'm going to just kind of chalk him in for about 20 solid points this week, kind of like I will every week. Thunder did get really lucky taking him. He has lost Purdy already. We're on week 2, and we already have a quarterback out. So he got lucky because that could have been disastrous if he had my bench of only Anthony Richardson. So looking good there, taking Flacco very late, too. So a good, solid draft pick there. All right, Sacco Paul, no slouch at the quarterback position. He does have Jalen Hurts and Caleb Williams. Now, Caleb might not be able to hit the broadside of a barn throwing, and really neither can Jalen Hurts, but they can both run, and that's all that matters in fantasy. So similar to Flacco, I don't really care about the matchup. The analysis, it doesn't matter. As long as Caleb keeps putting up 50 rushing yards, both of these guys you just pencil in for about 25 points a week. which is great for Paul. Caleb, a little more variance, obviously, because he doesn't run as much and he doesn't get the touch push, but he certainly ran around a lot last week. I think he had almost 60 yards. So Paul probably gets an edge here because of the high floor that his ceilings bring, or that his quarterbacks bring. But I think that Thunder has more upside. I'm not a Caleb believer at all. But he brings you a floor. At least he should this year, Paul. I know he didn't last year. All right. Moving on to running back. So again, that first group's going to go to the Sacco. All right, so moving on to running backs. Thunder made a huge statement on draft day. I mean, he went and got his guys. Two of his guys were Chase Brown and Travion Henderson. He took them well ahead of ADP. This week that looks like it's going to work out as they get the Jags and the Fins. Both defenses have terrible run defenses, and the Cincinnati Jags game has this kind of sneaky scoring bonanza written all over it. That assumes Trevor Lawrence can get going against a bad Cincinnati defense, but I think he can. I like this for Thunder. I think Chase Brown brings you some catching. Travion, I don't know. He got out-touched by Ramondre last week, but Henderson looked better than him, for sure. So, I think this is going to be better than I think ADP or AI predicts. So, moving on. Paul, who did Thunder pass on to draft Chase? Well, he drafted on Ashton Jeanty, and that is who Paul is bringing. And he didn't disappoint. Week 1, Jeanty played okay. He got all the work. He had 19 carries, but he wasn't very impressive with that, only 38 yards. So I think we expected that going into the year. We knew that Jeanty would get all the work, but we weren't really sure how good Las Vegas would be. Well, this week they get the Chargers. Herbert and the boys brought it last week on offense, and I think they're going to do the same this week to the Raiders. So I don't really see much production from Jeanty this week unless it comes in the passing game, and he just didn't show that last week with only 2 catches. He's supposed to have it, though, so I'm not going to predict that he gets a lot of points here, but I'll be watching it closely. I'm curious how it turns out for Jeanty. Going back to his other running back, Ken Walker. Ken Walker was extremely disappointing, arguably the most disappointing running back drafted. He had more. Zach Charbonnet, his counterpart, had more carries, more receptions, and simply outplayed him in week 1. At best, it looks like Ken Walker is getting a 50-50 split, and most people drafted him thinking he was going to have everything. That's not good. So I'm certainly taking the edge for Thunder this week. Maybe long-term it works out for Sacco, but the matchups are way too good here. They're definitely in favor of our rain predictor. All right, moving on to wide receiver. Thunder brings the ever-consistent Jay Jetta, the not-so-consistent J Mo, and Egbuka, I think I said that right, at receiver. You can chalk up probably 15 to 20 points basically every week for Jefferson. Again, doesn't matter who he plays. The analysis side comes with if he can have a spike week. Assuming J.J. McCarthy can play like he did in the fourth quarter of last week's game and doesn't just choke like he did the first 3 quarters, it might be a spike week for Atlanta. London is looking like he's going to play. He has a shoulder injury, but he looks like he's going to play. So assuming he does, Atlanta looked good last week. They kept up with Baker Mayfield in Tampa. I think this offense, and I said this preseason, that London was my dark horse to, have the Triple Crown type of thing. It sets up really well for him. Not that I think he'll actually get it, but that's my bold prediction. So I think the offense is going to be pretty good. So I don't think that this is J-Mo's week, though. So while Jetta should be in a high-scoring game, maybe this is a 2-touchdown type week. J-Mo's a boom or bust wide receiver. He's the opposite of consistent. his average depth per target is very deep. And that sounds great because like he could get a bomb. Yeah, or he could miss it all. I mean, those are low percentage completion passes. So I don't think this is his week because Detroit looked terrible in the run game last week. It was the first time in 2 years they could not establish the run. So I've got the Lions putting about 30 points, so maybe JMO does get one, but I think they do it through the ground this week. So I don't really like JMO, but again, not impossible that he kind of snags one here. Then you've got Ibuka. He lived up to every bit of draft season hype. This guy was getting drafted way too high everywhere, with the intent that he'd be just as good as Godwin last year. I mean, you're drafting the guy like he's a top 5 receiver. Well, came out the gate with 2 touchdowns week 1. Mike Evans did nothing. Not bad for a rookie. They get the Texans this week, and they're a mess. But their defense is good. I'm not so sure about their secondary, though. So I think if I'm the Bucs, what I'm wanting to do is have Baker try to pick them apart. I don't think I'm trying to establish the run game against that defense. So that means Ibuka's got a shot. Now, we all know Mike Evans is not capable of anything but running a deep route, so that bodes well for Ibuka trying to establish the short passes. I think he gets a pretty good week out of Ibuka again. So did he reach? Yes, you did. But hey, if it works, it works. All right, Sacco Paul brings an underwhelming group of wide receivers, but one with potential. Diggs was non-existent last week. He was like a 5 for 50. Nothing impressive. What was less impressive was Drake May. I mean, Drake May was everybody's just darling. This was going to be the top 7 guy that comes out of nowhere. He did not look good at all. He looked like he needed a bad defense. He needs to get his confidence up. Well, enter Miami. They get Miami this week. The Storm Duckless Fins have, I think, the worst secondary in the league. If not, they're certainly contending for it. So I'm not counting out any receiver against the Fins this year. So Diggs has got a shot, but Drake's got to play better. So we will see how that pans out. Next up is George Pickens. Again, a lot of offseason hype for this receiver. But after all that hype and Dak playing pretty well, not scoring well, but playing well, it was Javonte Williams stealing all the TDs. I did not have that on my bingo card. I don't think that continues, but Pickens only went 3 for 30. Now, I do expect him to have a better performance at home against the Giants. The Giants' front 7, kind of similar to the Fins. Front 7 isn't bad, but their secondary is bad. So I think he's got like a 4 for 60 type week, not a ton of catches. I don't think he gets a ton of catches at all this year. I think he's more the big play guy. But I do think he's got a 50-50 shot at a TD, and that's really what Paul needs to be hoping for in this group. If not, I don't see a whole lot of points coming his way here. Now, last up, I saved Paul's best receiver. It was Garrett Wilson. I was not a fan of Garrett Wilson going into the draft. He is literally the least efficient wide receiver of the past decade or since entering the league. He had 100 and, I'm doing this off the top of my head, 170, 80 targets, but only caught like 100 balls. I mean, he's catching like less than 70% of his targets. That's really bad. He just has not been efficient. He gets a ton of opportunities, but he doesn't do anything with it. Of course, the opposite side of that coin is that his quarterbacks and offenses have been bad. Yeah, sure, they have. But if you gave Megatron those opportunities, because he's supposed to be this great big wide receiver, Megatron would have done something with it. Garrett hasn't. He did have instant rapport with Justin Fields. We should have recognized that. I don't think was talked about enough that this was his college quarterback and maybe it was the next Burrow Chase, right? They should have this instant rapport. And they did. I mean, they looked good week 1. So I imagine that this duo is going to have some spike weeks. But I don't trust Garrett Wilson yet. I mean, he's gonna have to show me for like 8 weeks before I start buying in. So I do think he can have a spike week. I just don't think that's going to be going up against the Bills. So this week, I think the edge goes to Thunder, and I think it goes to him pretty significantly. I think the wide receiver group might get about 15 more points out of this group. So good for Thunder. If he wins this game, I think it's going to be on the back of the receivers. All right, moving on to the tight end and the flex. Thunder brings his preseason favorite, Tyler Warren, drafted well above consensus and well before ADP. So Simma really went out and got his guys. And he also brings a stack. He brings the Flacco stack with Jerry Jeudy. So Warren and Jerry Jeudy. The Friends looked atrocious last week against Tyler Warren. So maybe you can chalk his stats up to that. But if you watch that game, and I did, at least the beginning of it, the Colts scripted an entire first couple of drives around Warren. I mean, they were focusing the offense on him, or at least it seemed that way. So while Thunder took Warren early, he might be getting a steal. Now, the issue I have here is that you're going from playing Miami's defense to arguably the best defense in the league in Denver. I don't imagine this is a TD week for Warren, so maybe it's like a 5 for 50 week. Maybe he gets a lot of catches, 6 or 7. But I think that's your upside this week with Warren. I just don't see a lot there. Now, Jeudy is going to have to score this week if the Browns have any shot at beating the Ravens. So I do think that Jeudy can snag a TD. This will be a big deal for the outcome of this game. Our local rain predictor does need to be watching this one closely because that stack could make or break him. Now, the Sacco, he brings the biggest surprise of week 1. Breece Hall is in his flex, so he's got 2 Jets, so that's obviously the game he needs to be watching. But I'll be honest here, I have no idea how to predict this. The entire offseason, Aaron Glenn, all he did was talk about how he was going to have this 3-headed backfield. Braylon Allen was this bruiser. He's going to be great. Then he talked, Breece Hall himself said, I'm not their guy. There was nothing pointing to Breece getting a lot of work. Well, he did. He got over 90% of the running back work in week 1. And on top of that, he gashed Buffalo. Buffalo got gashed week 1 when they played the Ravens on the ground. Lamar and Derrick Henry had their way with them. So if Breece gets a lot of work in this, everything points to him having a good week. But at the same time, it wouldn't surprise me if he didn't play half the offensive snaps based on everything they said. I don't know what to tell you here. I mean, Breece is definitely the wild card. So I'll take Warren outscoring, the other flex here, their tight end, TJ Hawkinson. So that in that matchup. And I guess I'm going to take Thunder's group just because it's a little more for sure. No, that's not true. I will give this group to Paul, the Sacco. But obviously I am not very confident in what to think about Breece. All right. So we've got a pretty split game. Who am I taking to win? AI was not wrong. This is a tough one to call. And frankly, the Sacco's team is better than it should be. This is definitely Paul's best team of his 3 years in the league. The Sacco does have a lot of variance on his side, which can help. There's a world where he scores 170, but there's also a world where he scores 120. So I'm taking Thunder. It just boils down to having the higher floor, the better matchups. I think he's got a better shot this week. So I'm taking Thunder. Don't screw me again, Thunder. All right. Boys, that's it. Play me out. Week 2 in the books. Peace out.
We the jack shit sippers. We sippin' jack shit sippers. We sippin' jack shit sippers. Alan hit me on my phone. He said I need a hit quick.